Hi everyone, I am here. No, my camera doesn't seem to be available. Here I am. Okay, so hmm. Hello everybody. So so I am here and a bit recovered from last night. Hi Steve, Carmen, nice to see you. Oh, there goes my camera again. So I am here. And there goes my camera again. I hope my sound is all right now. I had a momentary echo. My camera is going on and off. I don't know why, but it's on now and hopefully it's going to stay on. How's my sound, everybody? Hi, Kathy. Nice to see you. My camera keeps going on and off, and I have no clue what the problem is. Okay, I'm going to turn it on once again. Check it out. Okay. Hello again. You should be able to see and hear me anytime now. Gary Hauk. Hi, Gary. Hi, Susan. Hi, Lana. Please share for me. Since my camera's been going on and off, I haven't had a lot of time to share yet. I'll appreciate all your shares, for sure. Hmm. Okay, how's my sound once again? Oh, there we go. Hmm. Okay, got one of them done. Can anybody hear me, by the way? I need a little bit of feedback from you about that. Mm. Okay, please do share. Can you hear me? Hey, Bonnie, is my sound good? Okay. I need some feedback, folks. And please give me some feedback on whether I can be heard. I'm not sure my sound is all right yet. How's my sound? Can you hear me yet, Bonnie? I've been saying something into the microphone for some time now. It's good. Great. That's the first feedback I've gotten. Somehow the comments haven't been getting to me. I don't know why. Okay, I'm going to go ahead then. I should be back in a second, everybody. There I am. Okay, so by now you've probably seen a whole bunch of things all day long, people reporting on results. And I'm going to give my take on the results as well, because of course they're so important and the various interpretations are different. I'll try to mention some other interpretations, okay, other than my own. First, I have to admit, okay, to the fact that in my predictions about what was going to happen on Super Tuesday, I was quite wrong. I'm not entirely certain of all the reasons why I was quite wrong, but there's no question that I was way, way off. How was I misled? Well, I was certainly misled in part by polls. By looking at polls for March the 2nd and March the 3rd. I had looked at an average of polls from March the 2nd, in other words, the Monday before the primary, which showed that Bernie was ahead by an average of 15 points in California. Okay, well, okay, and ahead by a solid 5 points in Texas. And one poll showed him with a healthy lead in North Carolina. So I had a variety of reasons to believe that Bernie Sanders was going to do very well on Super Tuesday. And in my enthusiasm, I suggested that I thought he could even win all but, well, let's just say most of the primaries. I was particularly emphatic that he would win the Virginia and North Carolina primaries, and also the Texas primary, and also the Minnesota primary, and the Maine primary, and the Massachusetts primary. And of course, I was wrong in most cases. Uh, he ended up actually winning according to the current counts, and I emphasize that according to the current counts, only 4 states: Vermont, Colorado, Utah, and California. Okay, now predictably, the state in which he won by the most was Vermont, where he had 50.8% of the vote. Uh, that was really at variance with his 2016 performance. Of course, his campaign is much more powerful this year, has many more volunteers and much more money, and there seems very little reason why he would have fallen way off the 80% he got in 2016. But the fact actually remains, maybe Bloomberg's money, his ads going up came, but Bloomberg got 9.4%, and also Elizabeth Warren got 12.6%. Those were not enough to get any delegates, but it was alarming to me they got as much as that. And then Joe Biden, of course, got 22.0%, which was also very, I wondered what the heck was going on with Biden getting 22% in Bernie's home state. I mean, why would he get that when the people overwhelmingly support their senator, Bernie Sanders, their favorite senator, when he runs for office? He wins by an overwhelming amount. 85% or something like that. And I never knew, there was never any indication that Joe Biden was so popular in Vermont, nor do I think he had a campaign there. And nor do I think, I don't think he was on the ground there. I doubt that he was very much up in advertising there. So the 22% he gained there was a little puzzling to me. I can't account for that. He did very well in Colorado, got 36% of the vote, but Biden got 23% of the vote, 23.6% of the vote, nearly 24% of the vote. So his margin in Colorado over Biden was, maybe 12% or something like that. And Bloomberg and Warren also got considerable percentages in that state, at least as of this count, in which 72.4% of the precincts reported in Colorado. Why did Bloomberg get so much? Why did Warren get so much in that particular state? I don't know. But while that state is overwhelmingly favorable to Bernie, the people in charge of that state are not so overwhelmingly favorable to Bernie. So I have to wonder why the margin wasn't still bigger in Colorado than it turned out to be. In particular, I wonder why was the margin in Utah so much higher than it was in Colorado. It was 34.6% for Bernie, okay, in Utah, but only 17.4%, okay, for Biden. So Bernie came close to doubling the percentage that Biden actually got there. And Bloomberg was lower. And Warren was lower. Warren was really very close to the margin of 15% and in danger of going below 15%. And Bloomberg was only at 16.7%. But the word basically seems to be that Colorado, which is a relatively progressive state, a fairly progressive state with a lot in common with Bernie Sanders, it's just surprising that he got a small margin. I also noticed something else, that the totals in Colorado seem to add up to 100%, but the totals in Utah, 52, 69, 15 is 84. The totals in Utah only seem to add up to 84.8%. Why don't the totals come close to 100%? What accounts for the differences? I wonder. I have to wonder. And then there's California. California is now reporting 93.1% of the vote, which is up by 4% from the 88.9 they were reporting about a half hour ago. So there was an update of this. Reportedly, the most of the votes that had been hanging out in California were from Los Angeles County, where Bernie was racking up the votes, in line with the fact that he had a great big margin among Hispanics in California. But Joe Biden gained a little, and Bernie lost a little compared to the previous total at 88.8. That doesn't really square. Also, further, there were no delegates for Bloomberg, except he got some delegates in districts where he went over the 15%. But generally speaking, he got very few delegates in California, and Warren had very few delegates in California because both were under 15%. Okay, so that was good. The only two contenders in California were Bernie and Biden, so they're probably going to share the vote. But what you have to keep in mind, everybody, is that if we round off, say Bernie got 34% of the vote and Biden 25% of the vote, that's a margin of 9% for Bernie in California up till now. But on the day before, the average lead for Bernie in California was 15 points. Are you really telling me that Bernie lost 6 points overnight in California to Joe Biden, whose office there was padlocked and who didn't have much of an ad campaign up there, that just on the strength of his South Carolina victory, that he would be gaining 6 points on Bernie overnight? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there was cheating in California. There wasn't enough to take the state away from Bernie, okay, and not enough to extinguish a very large lead that he had in terms of the delegate count. He still will get a heavy majority of the delegates there. He may even make up. A gap of roughly 100 votes. As of the counts here, okay, the delegate margins are recorded for Super Tuesday as 512 for Biden and 441 for Bernie, and that's a difference of 71, which is what they've been showing all day, with 284 delegates still to be awarded on Super Tuesday. So Bernie was only behind by 71, if I recall correctly. He went into Super Tuesday with a lead over Biden of 8 delegates. So he has 63 delegates to make up. From these results, he should be able to make them up in California, because he does have a lead of roughly 60 to 40 in the popular vote in California, if you exclude the people who did not make the 15%. So given all the delegates that are available in California, Bernie should be able to make up the 63 vote difference, or even go ahead of Biden, which would mean that technically he would have won on Super Tuesday, even in the face of very numerous victories by Biden in other states. Now let's go through the individual states for others. So the result in Alabama is not very surprising, but Bernie wasn't shut out. He got some delegates because he had 16.6%. Only Bernie and Biden had any delegates, and Biden had a slaughter of 63.2%, which is attributed to the fact that he got an overwhelming vote from older black people, okay, in Alabama. In Virginia, he got 53.2%. Bernie got only 23.1%. And that was at variance with the polls just a few days earlier. Of course, in Virginia, it's more believable that a lot of people here would have been impressed by the endorsements from Buttigieg and from Klobuchar and from Beto, because this state is very suburban, as they like to say, and full of people who work for the government and who are professionals in certain other areas, but who work for the government either directly, okay, or indirectly, but through contracts. And it's also sort of the residential headquarters for the deep state, as some people are fond of saying. So it's easy to believe that suddenly a lot of those people made a decision over the last 2-3 days that they were going to go overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. So that may be a legitimate result, But it's also true that the machinery here for counting the votes and for managing the count and things like that is dominated by a Democratic Party that was in the establishment's pocket, was and is in the pocket of the establishment. It is as establishment as they come. So I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there was a little bit, vote rigging here. But nevertheless, I will say that this particular result, looking back on it, is a believable result, but it does represent a great change in the pre-election polls here, in Virginia. In North Carolina, there was another great change, not as much, as in the Virginia area, and again, only Biden and Bernie are getting any delegates, but Biden came close to doubling Bernie, and Bernie had a very powerful campaign going on in North Carolina, and he was backed by the Poor People's Campaign there, and he had a lot of his surrogates go in there. And the surrogates are very effective campaigners, and he had a lot of support from the colleges, and the universities there, as he did in Virginia as well. Now, various states were attempting to suppress the vote of college people, and young people, and were probably successful to some degree. And maybe that accounts for some of the results that we're seeing here in these two states. But off the polling, they should have been much stronger than they turned out to be. In terms of the competition between Bernie, and Biden. In Tennessee, we had a performance by Bloomberg, which came to 15.5%, which means he took away even more delegates from Biden. He hurt Biden, in this particular state, without actually doing anything for himself. If he was not in, it would seem to indicate that Biden would have had 56% of the votes instead of only 41.7% of the vote. As it was, Bernie got 25.0% of the vote. I don't know that he was expected to get that off the polling. In Arkansas, there had been some polling strength for Bernie, demonstrated at certain points. But Bloomberg got 16.7% of the vote, and Biden ended with 40.5% of the vote. Again, Biden's percentage was hurt by Bloomberg's performance. That was also true, in Oklahoma. Bernie was relatively strong there compared to Biden, 38.7% versus 25.4%. But still, we expected off the polling that Bernie would be stronger in Oklahoma as opposed to Biden, and that maybe Bloomberg would be stronger in Oklahoma. Didn't really work out in that way. As we move to Minnesota, that was a very, very big surprise. First of all, Bernie was close to Klobuchar herself in Minnesota. We are asked to believe here that even though Bernie was only, let's say, 4.4 or 5 points down in relation to Klobuchar, that the endorsement by Klobuchar on Monday was able to transfer most of her votes over to Biden, because Biden wasn't doing anything in that state. But before the end, all of a sudden, off the party down in Texas the day before, he gets 38.6% of the vote. Forgive me if I doubt the veracity of that particular vote. It's too at variance with the previous polls. I would look for voter rigging in that state. Anyway, Bernie lost by 38.6 to 29.9, about 8.7 points, a fairly large margin. Warren got 15.4%, which is still worse for Bernie there because she qualifies for some delegates. Bloomberg was down at 8.3%. In Texas, you probably were following that. Much was made of the fact that Bernie was rocking it in the early vote, in Texas, and then the day of vote was going overwhelmingly, supposedly, for Biden, and Biden is supposed to have won by 34.5% to 30%. But there was a lot of cheating in Texas in various ways. People knew what counties and precincts were counties and precincts where Bernie was likely to do well. And in those counties, polling places were suddenly closed the day before or a couple of days before the primary. So people were impeded, from voting. Now, Bernie did phenomenally well, among the Hispanics in the state. Biden did extremely well. He did extremely well, among the blacks, in Texas. He did better among the blacks than Bernie did, among the Hispanics, in Texas. And the black vote, even though numerically it's less than the Hispanic vote, was heavy enough for Biden to overcome the advantage among the Hispanics, that Bernie had in Texas. But the question of what the influence of the cheating was remains. Because Bernie was ahead, certainly for a while, in Texas, and then as the night wore on, Bernie lost more and more and more and more. But how much did he lose because the day of Hispanic vote was repressed by the closing of the polling places? Now the Democratic Party in Texas is controlled by the establishment. It's not controlled by the Hispanics. So I think Texas is a prime place where there might have been some rigging. Now, Bernie still did very well in Texas, and the delegate count is going to be close if you compare the two of them, because they're basically splitting the vote. No other candidates got over 15%. But nevertheless, Texas in reality may have been a Bernie victory that was stolen from him in this case. Now Maine is another weird case. Biden won by 34.1 to 32.9 in Maine. So Maine is a neighboring state to Bernie. It's very close. He's very popular there. Biden had almost no campaign there, no presence there, no ads there, and yet he comes in with 34.1% of the vote. Now, all the vote hasn't been counted there yet, but there's very little of it out. So Biden probably won according to the counts. But the question was, to what extent were the voting machines a factor? in New Hampshire, a neighboring state to Maine, some of the voting machines that were used in that state, and which may have been used in Maine, I don't know whether they were or not, but it's likely that the same salespeople who sold the machines to New Hampshire would have also been going up to Maine and trying to sell the machines as well. These were the AccuVote machines. They are easily hackable. By Nico House at Mikasa Sukasa explains that there was a great discrepancy in but New Hampshire between what the exit polls showed and what the AccuVoting machines actually reported. In other words, there was a strong correlation between using an AccuVoting machine to count the votes and those districts in which the vote for Mayor Pete was very strong as compared to the vote for Bernie Sanders. So there was then some suspicion there that something was going on with the campaign. Anyway, if I were the Bernie campaign, I would be looking very closely at what went on in Maine, because that might have been a case where the vote was rigged to some extent. The same is true for Massachusetts. I mean, before the election, polls that existed for Massachusetts showed it as basically a contest between Bernie and Warren. And maybe Bloomberg was doing some advertising there, so maybe he would be a factor. Here's Biden coming in and beating Bernie by nearly 7 points. That doesn't look right to me, with Warren down at 21.4 as well. That's highly suspicious to me. So Minnesota, Texas, Maine, and Massachusetts are all suspicious. And if I were the Bernie campaign, I'd look at them very carefully, look at the possibilities for rigging the vote in those states, and look at the possibilities of cheating going on through hacking the machines. As I said before, nor do I think that the states that Bernie won might have escaped hacking. I wonder what's taking Colorado so long to count its vote. California still has 7% of the precincts to come in. But I was reading an article not too long before I went on, suggesting that there are still 3 million votes left in California to count. And I added up the count of votes for California that I saw for each person. It seemed like there weren't 3 million votes counted yet. And that the 93.1% of that are reporting, or at least the 88.8% that were reporting at that time, were reports that seemed to cover something like 2.8 million votes. People tell me that there are 3 million voters in Los Angeles County alone, not counting the rest of California. So where are all those votes? Where are they? To summarize, I think these elections are a scandal. But I'm also going to echo some other commentators here today, like Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty, who pointed out that right now the establishment has thrown every trick they could possibly throw, at Bernie Sanders. Every single dirty trick, every single devious plan, from the beginnings of the primaries to now. And there's a good chance that Bernie is still going to come out of Super Tuesday with a lead. Still come out with a lead, even after all the cheating that we apparently have seen or that we have good reason to suspect. So I want to make that clear. I do not trust these results. I don't think you should trust them. I think that Bernie should play no more Mr. Nice Guy, and challenge these results, especially Vermont, Colorado, also Utah and California, to see that he wasn't treated out of votes in any of those states, but in addition, to pay particular attention to Massachusetts, to Maine, to Texas, and to Minnesota. And North Carolina and Virginia, too. I think there might have been vote rigging in all those states. That's just the way it looks to me. I don't have hard evidence, but I do know, because of the way these voting machines work, that you cannot trust what comes out of the voting machines. I don't know what kinds of plans Bernie had in place to try to counter that kind of cheating, but I'd be very surprised if he didn't have any chance uh, on any plans at all to counter it. So anyway, these are the results. We're still awaiting for the awarding of the other 284 delegates, most of which, of course, are in California. And we have to wait and see how that's going to work out in the end. If my estimations are right, on this occasion, there will be enough votes for Bernie there, enough of a margin between he and Biden, that he may actually end up with a small lead coming out of Super Tuesday. Of course, Biden will have all the momentum because of the press narrative and everything else, but Bernie might very well still be the leader. We might not know that until almost next Tuesday, because California hasn't been promising it's going to take a long time to complete all the votes, and because the mail-in ballots were accepted right up to the day of voting, so right up to March 3rd. So, they might not get there until March 4th or 5th. And then the state will probably delay the counting because it may not want to give a boost to Bernie Sanders, or it may want to find a way, of rigging stuff. Okay, so what other results were important? The important results that I've seen on that day, from a progressive standpoint, Super Tuesday, is that Jessica Cisneros lost to Henry Cuellar in Texas. She was the Justice Democrat candidate who had been endorsed by Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez. And she lost by about 3 points to Cuellar, also 3,000 votes. So it was very close. It was a very close vote. Millions were spent on that race. Cisneros herself had more than $1 million to spend, and Cuellar must have had $3 or $4 million in funding from extremely rich people because they really wanted him to remain in there because he was the Democrat who famously voted 2/3 of the time with Donald Trump. So there was that. That's on the bad side. Okay. Another bad thing that happened was in the California 25th by Katy Hills district. That was the one where Christy Smith was running. She was the anointed one of Nancy Pelosi, okay, to run there. And she had actually no particular credentials to run there, and certainly not very progressive. But a creature, Pelosi, would be able to manipulate, to run, and someone who looked very sharp, of course. And she was being opposed by a few candidates, but one of the candidates was Cenk Uygur. And Cenk actually made a big splash when he entered that race. He raised a good deal of money to support himself in that race. I mean, he raised in excess, of $1 million, so he had enough money to get his message out. Well, a long story short, he was slaughtered. He got only 5.2 votes in the primary. He did not make the top two in that particular jungle primary. And so Christy Smith will be running against a Republican, as I recall. So that was bad news. A little bit of good news. Okay, a guy by the name of Amar Kampa-Najjar, who ran in 2016 and then again in 2018 in what used to be Duncan Hunter's former district in California, got into the top two. I think came in first in the jungle primary he was in. But there were 3 Republicans who were running against him, and they had a majority of the vote. So one of them, who got something like 23% of the vote, is going to oppose him. But of course, if the Republicans consolidate behind a single candidate, they evidently have more votes, which is not surprising because this was a Republican district for some long time. So that news is sort of half in, half out. Piece of good news happened in California. I forget. I think it's the 24th or the 23rd, or maybe it's the 12th. Any case, it's Nancy Pelosi's congressional district in California. Okay, and so Nancy Pelosi, of course, did well in her race. She got, I think, something in the 70s, if I recall correctly. But she was challenged by a number of people, and the person who came in second and therefore gets to challenge her in the fall is Shahid Shahid Buttar, who is a wonderful candidate, very aggressive candidate, a very progressive candidate, as progressive a person as you would want to vote for. He got only 12.8% of the vote, but he still came in second. So he makes the runoff in the fall, and there he will be facing only Nancy Pelosi. He will probably be relatively well funded. She, of course, will have enormous funds but he'll probably have enough funding to get his message out. So she may be facing a tough primary in her district for the first time in ages and ages. So that was good news from California. Also, Ro Khanna came in first in his primary. He did very well in his primary, and he's running against a Republican. He doesn't have a progressive challenger, so he undoubtedly will win in his district. He's dominant enough in his district that he is going to win. Of course, he is a co-chair of Bernie Sanders' campaign, so it's fair to say that he is a Sanders Democrat. So those were the results from Super Tuesday that I wanted to go into. There is reason to be shocked and to be discouraged, considering the expectations, but there is great reason to be encouraged because, as everybody is saying today, and I think they're right, the race has now consolidated. Klobuchar is out, Steyer is out, also Mayor Pete and Mayor Mike have both withdrawn. Now, each of these people, except for Tom Steyer, has endorsed Joe Biden, and Beto O'Rourke has endorsed also Joe Biden. So that's the current situation. Supposedly, Elizabeth Warren is reconsidering her campaign since she performed really terribly on Super Tuesday. She got over 15% only in Minnesota, in Maine, and in Massachusetts. I'm sorry. She got over 15% in Colorado and Utah. But she was in the margin in many of those states, and the Utah 15.5% may not last when the rest of the votes are counted. 74.3% of the votes, they say, in Utah have been counted. The remaining votes may knock her out, and she might not get anywhere. There's 79.4% counted in Colorado, so there's 21% of the votes still there. She has 17.3% there. She might possibly be knocked out in that state. So right now, as we speak, she can only be sure of making the threshold of 15% in one, two, of those states. Kind of amazing. And she didn't come close to winning any of them, not even her home state. And in her home state, she was not only beaten by Bernie, but she was beaten by Joe as well. So it's going to be hard for anybody to understand why she remains in the race other than as a spoiler for Bernie Sanders. There seems no other kind of rationale for her continuing to stay in the race. Now, Crystal Ball has come out with a statement this morning saying that she sees a weakness in the Bernie Sanders campaign in relation to being able to get the suburban vote, the suburban, well-educated, middle-class vote. Crystal thinks that Bernie could get that vote for his campaign, as well as get Elizabeth Warren out of the race, if he gets on the phone to her at this point, and he promises her the nomination for VP if he wins. If she in turn will drop out, okay, and endorse him. As campaign strategy, that may be, I suppose it has something to say for it. But here's the ticket. Where Bernie has been doing not so well is among black people over 45. In the 45 to 64 range, or the 49 to 64 range, but depending on how it's measured in each state, and the 65, okay, and over range. He's doing very poorly in both of those categories, and is at a big disadvantage to Biden within those categories. But most of the states where that vote is terribly important, we're here on Super Tuesday. There are still a few states left where it might be important. But this weakness of his, which we've seen now, okay, this inability, it seems, if it's not accounted for by the cheating, okay, but if this seeming inability to appeal for large segments, okay, of the black vote is actually seen as a valid sort, okay, of disability, then we have to ask, well, is that going to be a disability for him if he is the nominee? Okay. Or are older black people going to flock to the polls for him in any case, out of fear of Trump? And of course, once he's the nominee, okay, the Democratic Party, he has control of the machinery of the party. Then the party in all the states is going to begin to hear the true narrative about how Bernie has been a constant support for blacks all over the country all through his career. Going back to the 1960s, that narrative still hasn't gotten out to many, many people, especially a lot of the people who voted on Super Tuesday. So the question is, what are the returns he can expect from now putting in a lot of resources to try to cure a defect that he's been trying to cure now since 2016? I mean, he spent a good deal of time in South Carolina and a good deal of time in North Carolina and sometime in Virginia, okay, as well during this period of time, and a good deal of time in Texas. Okay, I don't think he went to Alabama. I don't think he made an effort there. But one has to ask, what's the wisdom of trying to cure this deficit at this particular point in time, as compared with the suburban deficit that he has, that Krystal is talking about? So this argues, perhaps, for Krystal's particular strategy. But what argues against that, okay, is another deficit, okay, that Bernie has. And this deficit may be even more serious. And that's the deficit with people 65, okay, and over. Now, Bernie Sanders has a program, and you know that I've live streamed about that. He has an agenda that if the whole agenda were passed, would count for retired senior couples similar to my wife, okay, and myself, would allow them to gain 25,000, roughly $250 per year from Bernie's agenda. I mean, it's marvelous for seniors over 65. Okay, and none of them seem to know it. I think it might well be worth the resources of Bernie's campaign to send workers in to senior centers all over the country, or to train a lot of the volunteers whose grandparents, okay, are over 65, to train them specifically to talk to their grandparents about Bernie's whole agenda and what a financial difference it can make for them. It seems to me this vote is ripe for the taking. All they need to do is be exposed to the facts. That's all they need to do. Just go in there and tell them the truth. And tell them one of the groups Bernie Sanders supports most strongly with his agenda and his program is people over 65 like them. Maybe they can be persuaded that they can have nice things. Why not? Now, I'm not saying it's easy. I live in a senior development now. And believe me, my neighbors and friends here don't like to talk politics. They try to shut it down real quick. They have 150 other things to talk about during the day. But when people retire, they often don't like to have the conflict which often results from a discussion of their political opinions, who they favor, and what policies they favor. And they also don't like to cope with the fact that many of them are not very well informed and they're just voting out of habit. Unfortunately, they do go to the polls, okay, as long as they can stand. And some of them even go to the polls when they can no longer stand. They get people to drive them over there, and then they get curbside assistance. Someone brings them a ballot, and they can still vote. And they do vote. So they think it's their duty to vote. Unfortunately, whether they know anything about who they're voting for or not, they still think it's their duty to vote. Oh, yeah. So it seems to me that's a group where Bernie could go to extend his base. I mean, greatly. I mean, he's losing that group to Biden by margins of like 61% to 8%. What happens if he could cut that margin to 40 to 30? I think he'd get okay, a lot more delegates and be able to turn around some of the kinds of margins we're seeing here that Biden, okay, is getting. So one of my suggestions, okay, for the campaign is that he goes after older people. This would even help him in Florida, of course. Going for middle class voters in suburban areas may not help him much in Florida. But trying to strengthen himself with seniors may help him a great deal there. Of course, in Florida, of course, that's one of the favorite places in the country for cheating. I'm talking about cheating in terms of the machines and cheating in voter suppression, cheating, okay, in every other way. Anyway, so Nico House really disagrees with Crystal Ball, and so do I think, in terms of whether Bernie should now try to improve his standing with the suburban vote by sacrificing his VP pick to Warren. And the reason I feel this way, of course, is because I think that Warren has revealed herself as someone who isn't really a progressive. I don't doubt her sincerity in terms of having a long-term desire to curb the abuses, okay, of Wall Street. That's been a big part of her life for a long time. And even if she's gone soft on that now for a few years, I expect that's something that's ingrained in her. But I think it's been truthfully said that other than in that way, she's a Republican in Democratic clothing. She's the kind of Republican that maybe Teddy Roosevelt was, okay, or maybe La Follette was, a clean government Republican. But she's still a Republican in terms of the business principles she believes in. I think her statement that she's a capitalist to her bones was true. I don't think we need her right now. I think that her agenda is poor from the climate emergency point of view. Her ideas on getting to Medicare for all are politically absolutely crazy. And she would be very vulnerable to attacks from the Trump campaign and from Pence as the vice presidential candidate. Trump would have a field day if the Democrats were to run as their vice presidential candidate the author of Pow Wow Chow. I think that's the title of her cookbook. Trump would have a ball with that one, considering what's happened to a claim of Indian ancestry and her failure to go to Standing Rock. She's just going to be ripe for all kinds of attacks. Also, Bernie would have a problem if he wants to put her on the ticket. What's he going to do with her PAC? She folded and went to a PAC. So now part of the deal has to be that he has to get her to give up the PAC. Well, she might be willing to give it up in favor of, being the vice presidential candidate. I don't know. But I think by far the most serious consideration is Bernie is 78 years old. He needs a vice presidential candidate who's likely to carry forward the legacy he provides to the American people. He might not get through his first term. It's a realistic possibility. When he takes office, he'll be 79. I mean, he's great now. He looks like some kind of Iron Man out there when he campaigns. He's been even better since the stents, were put in. It's just fantastic what he can do in a single day. His energy is unbounded, and his drive is unbounded. And his mental capacities are just fantastic, especially when compared to Biden. But when compared to Bloomberg, too. And I might even argue, even when compared to Warren. But that's another kettle of fish, entirely. Anyway, I think he needs that kind, of vice president who'll be ready to step into his shoes and carry through the kind of program that he has outlined and that he has given to us, that will fight for it, tooth, and nail. I don't know who that will be, at this point. I think Tulsi Gabbard is one person who might do that. I think that she's weak on the economics front. I think she needs to have 2 or 3 intensive weeks with Stephanie Kelton. That would greatly help her. But I think she could be a great vice presidential candidate. And she'd be a great asset in the foreign policy field in relation to the kind of foreign policy that Bernie wants to carry out. On the other hand, we're talking about who would make a very good vice president for him. And the other consideration is who would make a running mate for him. Right now, the running mate by requirement is the primary one, because he'll never get to be president unless he can select a running mate who would be able to handle the job, who could run along with him. I'm not sure who that could be at this point. One needs an experienced person, a fairly experienced person, who can deal with the Congress, somebody who's very good in foreign policy, and someone who will follow along with his ideas about social and economic and climate change. The name of Barbara Lee has been frequently brought up. I don't know whether Barbara Lee would solve the problem with respect to suburban support. She might help with the black vote, and she might help with older people, with seniors also. She's a person of tremendous integrity, and dignity. And Bernie may turn to her. She's a good friend of his. We'll see. Okay, now, Bernie said that his VP is going to be a woman. And when I go over women candidates who would be qualified in all the ways I mentioned, I can't think, okay, of any particular persons other than Gabbard and Lee. Okay, I think Lee would be better as a running mate. Gabbard would make a better vice president. So that's my take on that. But I also think there are some men who would make very fine candidates for the vice presidency, though one of them is unfortunately a Caucasian male. Okay, and the other one is someone of South Asian ancestry who may not have been born here. Let me see what his status is. I'm thinking of Ro Khanna, of course. He was born here. He's Native American. He's 43 years old. He was born in 1976 in Pennsylvania. So Ro is eligible. I think he'd make a fine vice presidential candidate. He's a person of color. He'd be great with the suburban vote. And he'd be excellent as a vice president as well in bringing Bernie's agenda, in completing Bernie's agenda, okay, if Bernie isn't able to do it. Okay, but Ro's not a woman. And Bernie has promised us a woman candidate. Okay, now also Jayapal would make a very fine candidate, Pramila Jayapal. But she came here when she was 16. So she's not a Native American. I can't think of anybody else who is old enough and who has the requisite amount, okay, of experience. So that's it. As far as Warren, I would worry that if Bernie died, she would not be loyal to the agenda they were elected on. That she would fall back. Okay, I've taken a lot of time to go through this, but I'm not quite finished yet. I wanted to spend some time going through. Okay, let's assume that after Super Tuesday, the two come out. Either one is 30 delegates ahead, or the other is 30 delegates ahead. Something in that range, okay, in that particular variation of 60 delegates. So in other words, from the standpoint of the big picture, they're pretty much tied, okay, at the end of Super Tuesday. So what are the next primaries that are coming up? Well, they're on March 10th. There's the Idaho primary. Bernie won that in 2016. That, okay, is 20 votes. He won it big in 2016. He'll probably do okay there now. The Michigan primary, there are 125 delegates. He surprised in that one, and he won it in 2016. It wasn't it wasn't a very big margin, but he shocked Hillary Clinton by winning that particular primary. He wasn't really expected to. Now, right now, according to the latest polls, in the run-up to Super Tuesday, the polls were showing that he was a little behind Joe Biden, okay, in Michigan. I think by the time the primary rolls around, that is next Tuesday, he will easily have passed Joe Biden. He'll bring up the ads this week. He'll go to Michigan. He'll make some speeches. He'll spread his message, which is going to now be one of contrast between himself, okay, and Joe Biden. He's in real earnest about this. He's already put up the ads, and he's going to be talking about his differences. When he is in Michigan, he'll be campaigning around the state with Rashida Tlaib, who, of course, you know, is a real barn burner. So I think Bernie's going to have a lead in the state by next Tuesday. I think he'll win. Okay, but again, I have to add, even though the machinery of counting in that state is in the hands of the Democrats, it's in the hands of the establishment Democrats. And I don't know what the arrangement of voting machines is, okay, in Michigan, what the possibilities are, but I know he won that primary in 2016, that he should be able to do so again against Joe Biden, especially he's going to go there. He's going to talk about Biden's positions on Social Security, Biden's positions on trade that have put so many Americans out of work, by Joe Biden's current support for free trade treaties like NAFTA and like the TPP. I mean, Biden still supports those things. Still. He's had all kinds of opportunities to retract his support for those things, and he never has. And then, of course, there's the crime bill, and there's the Iraq war. 4 things to hit him on in Michigan. He's highly vulnerable in Michigan. He's going to lose Michigan. Okay, in Mississippi, I originally thought that was sure to go for Biden. But I forgot that there's a black mayor in one of the biggest cities, okay, in Mississippi. I'm not sure, I think it's in Jackson, who has endorsed Bernie Sanders and is a big fan of his and is going to campaign with him around the state. That should turn some of the black voters we've been talking about towards Bernie Sanders. We will see. But Bernie is going down to Mississippi to campaign. He hopes to cut in to Joe Biden's support there. And who knows, maybe it won't take much to change things around, but we have to see. But he will be making an effort. In Missouri, there are 68 delegates. Okay, I would not think he'd be as strong as Biden in that state because that's a red state. And the Democrats from there are very centrist, and they fit a Biden profile much more than they fit a Bernie profile. On the other hand, I think there's a sizable working class there. And there are also the kind of rural people that Bernie has done very well with in the past. So maybe he'll have some success there. I no longer think that that necessarily will be a Biden sweep. Now, Bernie won the North Dakota caucuses. in 2016. I have no reason to believe that he won't be able to win them again. And then come the Washington primaries, 89 delegates there. The lion's share, okay, of delegates here is in Michigan and in Washington, two states in which Bernie has been very, very strong in the past. Washington is likely to look like California in relation to Bernie support. In fact, it may actually be better than California, not so much because the support itself is better, but because the election may be a lot cleaner in Washington. And because the people in Washington may be quite a lot less likely to cheat Bernie than the establishment in California is. So anyway, I think Bernie can do very well next Tuesday. He might be able to pick up 100 delegates on Biden then. So he may go into a lead at that point. There'll still be a long way to go. It won't be a huge lead because there are not nearly as many delegates on offer next Tuesday as they were on Super Tuesday. But following that, there are some small primaries. Then March 17th is another big day. There's 67 delegates in Arizona, comparable to Colorado. And Bernie can do well in Arizona, I think, even though Clinton won it. I don't think she won it by that much, as I recall, in 2016. I think that Bernie's got some strength there. And there are a lot of Hispanics there, of course. And there are Native Americans there, too. I think the Native American vote there is somewhat important. Then there are the Florida primaries. I'm sure Biden's going to be very strong in Florida because the Hispanics in Florida, well, I don't think you can generalize so much about the Hispanics in Florida. There are, of course, the Cubans in Florida. There are Puerto Ricans in Florida. Large numbers, of Puerto Ricans at this point. And there are Southern blacks, in Florida. And they will probably have similar attitudes to those who have been voting for Biden in some of the other states. And then there are also a large number of Jews in Florida as well. And these are Jews who are not going to appreciate Bernie's particular stance on the Palestinian rights. They're just not going to appreciate that. I mean, I can tell you that because they don't care about the fairness of the thing. Or let's say that the nationality considerations or the loyalty to Israel trumps that concern. And I think the older the people, the more it trumps that concern. So I don't know how well Bernie will do in Florida. There are 219 votes there. But I think he'll get some. He may be able to walk away with a third of the delegates. And since Bloomberg has dropped out, so maybe Biden is in line for 2/3 of the delegates and Bernie for 1/3 of the delegates. I think Bernie can get a lot of the Puerto Rican vote in Florida. The reason why I think that is he's probably going to take AOC down with him to campaign. And there are probably going to be big rallies with the Puerto Ricans down there. I don't know what he's going to do about the Jewish people down there who have gone to Florida to retire. There are many, many, many of them, especially in South Florida. Now, a campaign to try to get senior support might succeed down there, but of course, it might be impossible to stop the rigging of the voting machines. It's probably going to go on. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is still a power down there, and it's been very hard to stop the cheating. Very, very hard. Tim Canova was victimized by that twice when he ran against her for Congress, and it's just been terrible down there. So then there are the Illinois primaries. Bernie has to be favored there. He was very strong in the Illinois primaries in 2016, and he should be stronger today. Now, of course, the machine is strong there. I don't think they cheated him in 2016. They may not cheat him now. I don't know what their resources are to do that. Okay, I think that Rahm is no longer the mayor of Chicago. That should have some bearing on the situation. But I think Chuy Garcia is the mayor, isn't he? So that may be a much more friendly place, okay, for Bernie than some of the others. And what he loses in Florida, he may be able to make up, okay, in Illinois. Then there's Ohio. Both Illinois and Ohio, Joe Biden is vulnerable in both because of the TPP aspect of things and because of his weaknesses on Social Security and because of the anti-war vote in both places. There are a number of things that he can be called to account for. So I'm saying I think March 10th and March 17th look fairly promising for Bernie to go ahead. On March 24th, we can probably expect Bernie to lose ground in the Georgia primary for the same reason that he lost the North Carolina primary. And then there's the primary in Puerto Rico that Clinton won. It has 51 delegates. Okay, in Puerto Rico. Bernie has been extremely friendly to Puerto Rico and has been fighting for relief for Puerto Rico for some time, which Biden has not been particularly active in doing. So Bernie may be able to pull a surprise down there. There no longer are establishment Democrats down there. They might go for Bernie. There are 51 delegates down there. Then there's April 4th. That's going to be split. Bernie will do well probably in the Hawaii primary, I suspect, and in the Wyoming primary. But when it comes to Louisiana, I don't know. That may be my intuition for that is that that's probably going to be Biden. So Biden will probably pick up some grounds there. When we get to April 7th, I think the Wisconsin primary is going to be dominated by Bernie. I don't think Bernie's going to be able to win there. He did very well in the Wisconsin primary in 2016. And I think right now, with the state beginning to turn more towards the progressive, he's going to do very well in that particular primary. I don't think that through these primaries, I don't think the issue is going to be decided. I think Bernie may have a lead of 200 or 300 delegates by the end of April 7th or something like that. But on April 28th, what they're calling, okay, the Excella primary is going to happen. And that may be the issue where things are going to be decided. There are a lot of delegates on offer there. Connecticut has 60, Delaware has 21. That, of course, is Joe Biden's home state. There's 96, okay, in Maryland. Establishment forces are very strong, okay, in Maryland, but they've been challenged by progressives for a long time. Bernie will be strong in Maryland, but whether he can take it or not, okay, is problematic. In New York, I think Bernie's going to do very well because there's been a progressive resurgence there, as you know. And I don't know whether the establishment is going to be able to hold on to the state. They have been able to thus far for a few years. But Bernie has a lot of volunteers there and he'll have a lot of funding there. And that's going to be a battle royale for New York State and for New York City. But there are 274 delegates there, and I think Bernie can get a lot of them, and hopefully a majority of them. Pennsylvania is going to be another battle royale. Joe Biden actually comes from Pennsylvania before he moved to Delaware, and he's got roots there. And a lot of Pennsylvania is very conservative. But there's still a lot of industry there. There are a lot of working class people there. There are a lot of people really, really deprived, and Bernie's program is perfect for them. I think Bernie's going to win there, and he may win there by quite a lot. I think Bernie will do well in Rhode Island as well. I think there's a progressive strain there also. In short, I think it may be apparent, okay, to the Democrats by the end of April that Bernie is their nominee. But we will have to see. It's hard to account for the cheating. It's hard to know what's going to happen. In my view, this thing could be undecided right up but through the end of the primaries. There may be no one who has a majority of the delegates. We'll just have to see how close they come. But to summarize, or to conclude, I certainly don't think that Bernie is out of this yet. I think he's still going to go ahead. I think he's going to go into the convention with a lead. It won't be as lead as he would have had if he had won states like Texas and Minnesota, Massachusetts, but North Carolina, and the other states that he was apparently headed for a win in on Super Tuesday. And he won't have as many delegates as he would have had if the California vote didn't suddenly tank somewhat on him for no apparent reason. But he may come in with a sizable lead of 300 to 400 delegates. So I think we can hope for that. I think we need to work for that. I think we need to donate for that. And I think we have to support him for that. Because what I've said is a very real possibility at this point. That Bernie's going to have to fight. He's going to have to show the contrast between Biden, okay, and he. He's going to have to be rough on Biden. He can't be caring for Biden's personal feelings. I don't think he should get dirty. Of course not. But he should talk issues and contrast the issues. and tell the truth on the issues. I also think he should back his people. When Zephyr Teachout comes with a strong critique of Joe Biden that she published in The Guardian, he should not be soft pedaling the critique or disavowing his support for the critique. What Zephyr Teachout wrote was very factual. And the statements, that Nina Turner made when she was on the road in North Carolina campaigning for him, calling Joe Biden out on his record on race, everything Nina Turner said was factual. Everything was justified. And Bernie reined her in. He failed to support her. His strongest campaigner, his strongest supporter, his most faithful support, he pulled the rug out from under her then. And she still fights for him every day, all the time, like no one else fights for him. He has to back his people as long as they're telling the truth. As long as they're keeping things within bounds of telling the truth. He needs to support them and pull out all the stops. Because we've all sacrificed to support him going into 2016 and now again. He owes us. He owes us that he will pull out all the stops to defeat Joe Biden in order to win this race. Not for him. It's not me. It's us. He's got to remember, it's not me. It's us. Us is not Joe Biden. Us is all of the rest of us. And I'll end on that thought. So I hope you'll still hear. I'll be checking in with you in just a second. For now, please note, please share, like, and subscribe when my YouTube goes up in a little while. And please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. Please, please, please. Okay. I'm going to take a look at your Facebook comments now. Ah, wonderful. Most of you apparently are still here. In fact, according to Facebook, you have grown in numbers since I've started. I'm going to refresh my page. Hang in there. After I refresh my page, I'm not so sure any of you are still here. It's not giving me an indicator of how many people are here. When I took the trouble to refresh my page. Oh, there are 21 of you still here, evidently. Well, excellent. That's excellent. After I refresh my page, I'm not so sure any of you are still here. That should have taken care of the echo. Sorry about that. So, Elsie Bailing says, only me to all meet me, personal history, my heifer personal Internet Code Marketing at Newswork. I'm not sure how to read that one. Anyway, Steve Wolfbrand says Bernie better go negative on Biden. Okay, I think he's got to go factual on Biden, but I think he has to contrast his record to Biden's, and he has to be critical, okay, of Biden's records. That's what it's about now. Yeah, Kay says Jayapal wasn't born here, sadly, or I would want her to. Roe is very good, though, and California would replace him with another Dem, too, I think. Hopefully another progressive Dem. And Kathy says Biden's turn to be put to the test. And Larry Alger says, Biden? Really? Shit. Elsie keeps making these comments that are very hard to read. Carmen says, all Bernie has to bring up is Biden's racist past. No, he has to do more than that. He has to bring up his racist past. He has to bring up his past in free trade, which has victimized the whole Midwest. He has to bring up his attempts to cut Social Security, which everybody over 45 in the country would be concerned about. He has to hit also on Iraq. He has to hit on all those things. The full board. Don't let Joe off the hook for anything. The crime bill as well. Don't let him off the hook for anything. There has to be a barrage of true stuff about Joe Biden's record. Carmen says, Republicans are filing as Democrats to obstruct Bernie. I don't know. They might be filing as Democrats to obstruct Joe Biden. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they're doing. I'm not sure what the word is to them. Kay says the southern states will all go to Trump anyway. That's true, but we're talking about here winning primaries. We're talking about his contest with Biden right now. Later, his contest with Trump, of course. Susan Eldridge sent me a message, which I'll have to wait for a while to read, I'm afraid. Maybe I'll get a chance to take a look at it. Oh, thank you for all the shares. Steve says Florida's rigged. Kay says yes, it is. Steve. Carmen says, it was a little bit frightening. And Steve says, we're old, to laugh out loud. And Carmen says, and the mayor of Puerto Rico, Yulin, likes Bernie. Yeah, she does. She was campaigning for him in New York. Yeah, so maybe she will come to Florida also and be there with AOC and Bernie. That would be wonderful. And then she can also campaign for Bernie in Puerto Rico itself. She'll be a great asset. Carmen says, my parents played that song constantly. Steve said, I love that song. It's so stupid. He said it twice. Kathy says, is it true that in a contested convention, all of Bernie's delegates would have to be convinced to switch in order for him to lose if he is the front runner? No. If Bernie had less than a majority, okay, of delegates, then he could retain all of his delegates, and he still could lose to somebody else who got a majority, okay, of delegates. Now, I don't think all of Bernie's delegates are going to be loyal to him, but I suspect a very high percentage of them will be, maybe as many as 90%. But it's hard to estimate that because everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people have some degree of loyalty to party that may begin to figure in here if it looks like Bernie is sure to lose. Carmen says, my grands did too. They were huge Bruce Lee fans. Rick Maynard says, have to go of homework to do, just finished moving. Got my internet hooked up just yesterday. Congratulations, Rick. Have to study history of my guests and topics for tomorrow's show. Good night, all. And Dale says, good night, Richard. And Kay says, not sure on that, Kathy. Nomiki had a great show a few days ago, which laid out just how screwed up the system is as far as the convention goes. Steve says, good night. And Kay says, night, Richard. He says he prefers Rick, by the way. I asked him one time. That's what he told me. Kathy says, that's where I thought I heard about needing all of Bernie's delegates to flip, which I can't see that happening. No, that's not going to happen. That's never going to happen. Steve says, Bernie better get tough. These are not your friends, Bernie. Yeah, that's echoing all around the internet today. These are not your friends, Bernie. And that's true. Kay says, Kathy, I've known the system was screwed up, but that info from her and her guest made me feel sick. Yeah, I know. I know. Nomiki is bringing the truth from the inside. Kathy says, I think Bernie sees his target now. We'll see. Nomiki brings the truth. Carmen says, well, hell, we need Nina for president then. And David Serza said, that is why she will be the vice president pick, I think. She may well be. Kathy Butari says, oh, maybe it's a different episode or I misunderstood. Steve Wolfbrand said, everybody was kung fu fighting for Bernie. And Steve Wolfbrand gives us some musical notes. And Russ says, it's about time for me to call it a night. See you again soon. Thank you, Russ. Kay says, I know she has a lot of episodes, but this one had Roe on the first half and another reporter on the second half. If you can find it on her YouTube site, check it out. Thanks, Kay. I will. I haven't seen that one. Lana says, Susan Eldridge and five other... I'm sorry. So Lana and Susan Eldridge and five other people joined. Bonnie has joined. Again, Kathy joined. And Carmen joined. And I am finished with all the comments and have read them out and replied to all that I thought was salient. Do you have any more comments or questions that you'd like to ask me? Because I have been here for close to 2 hours now. And I have to get up unreasonably early tomorrow morning. And so I'm about ready to say goodnight. I enjoyed this show very much. I hope you did too. And I hope to see you again but tomorrow night when I will have more political news. Certainly more political news. Who knows? Maybe we'll have a better final result from California. Let me make one more. Let me take one more look at California. before I say goodbye. Still 512 to 441, according to Politico. 92.8% of the California vote now in place. Bernie has almost a 9-point lead still. Nothing much has changed there. The Colorado count is the same as it was. Nothing's changed there. So it is as I said it was. So I'll be saying goodnight now. A number of people have messaged me. Steve said, sorry to bother, but can you see my comments on live chat? You mean on the live chat for the video? No, I haven't seen any comments from you, Steve, yet. Let me refresh my page. I didn't see any comments from you. I'll refresh my page and check them out. Okay. Hopefully, when I refresh my page, I'll get them. This will take a second. Kathy says, great show, Joe. Thank you, Kathy. Larry says, keep up the great work, Joe. Thank you, Larry. Dale Weaver says, good night, Doc. Good night, all. Steve says, have Bonnie on the show sometime. I'd love to have Bonnie on the show, but I think Bonnie's a little too shy about going on shows. But I'd love to have her on the show. That would be great fun. Oh, Steve says, have Bonnie on the show sometime. Would Bernie help Assange? I am absolutely convinced that Bernie would help Assange, but he's never going to campaign on that. He won't ever campaign on that. And he won't ever say that he will help him, because with the nomination at stake, he will not get into that particular controversy. He's got enough trouble just with the fact that he once told the truth about Cuba. I mean, imagine the fury of the mainstream idiots if he said he was going to help Assange. Okay, he says, well, I'm out of here tonight. Have a peaceful night. We'll talk soon. Kathy says, thanks for your answer, Joe. Susan says, Bernie can do whatever he wants. He won't be running again. Yes, he can. He can do exactly whatever he wants because he won't be running again. Steve says, sleep well. Thank you, Steve. And Susan says it's about the Massachusetts exit poll discrepancies. Thank you, Susan. I'll be happy to read that. I'm sure there are big Massachusetts exit poll discrepancies. They probably had those same machines in Massachusetts, right? Hackable machines. Cases about the bedtime for me too, Steve. And Steve Wolfbrand says, I'm here but going to bed after this. You're such a young man. Why are you going to bed after this? Steve says, night, Russell. Night, Russ. Steve Gonzo, I'm not getting your chats. I don't know why. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place, but I have not gotten your chats. Anyway, on that note, For some reason, I have not gotten your chats. Okay, so I'm saying good night now. Uh, and I'll ask Bonnie if she's willing to come on. Thanks for coming, everybody. See you tomorrow.